Hello, Leather Rebels, it's your local Trash Panda Slayer here. Have you ever listened to a band's whole discography and then noticed an album that is much worse than the rest of the band's discography? God forbid if it's multiple albums in a row that are disappointing relative to everything else that the band has made. For Metallica, that was the Load Reload to Saint Anger days. For Iron Maiden, that would be the Blaze Bayley days. And for Judas Priest, quite possibly my favorite band of all time, that is generally considered to be the late 90s and early 2000s era with Tim Ripper Owens on vocals. Hell, one of these two albums is suspiciously absent from Spotify, something that occasionally happens with flop albums that nobody bought or liked. But there's also another brief-lived dark age of Judas Priest, back during metal's heydays back in the 1980s. And that would be their 1986 album, Turbo, the first and also last album Priest made that fully delved into glam metal territory. This was disappointing to many fans back in the day because Judas Priest, while having songs and albums that undoubtedly influenced hair metal going forward, were by and large a pure heavy metal band. Their work in the mid to late 70s laid the groundworks for NWO BHM, speed, and thrash metal, and they were also the first metal band to adopt the leather and spikes look that defined 80s metal. So for many tried and true metalheads in the 1980s, seeing Judas Priest attempting to become a full-blown glam metal act was quite disappointing. But hey, this is a 2000s kid speaking here, and thanks to the GTA Vice City games, not to mention my love for androgyny and melodic metal riffs, I'm more receptive to glam metal when it's done right. Firstly, we have to talk about vibes and aesthetics. Judas Priest were already in their 30s when this album came out, and people in their 30s in the 80s looked older than 30-somethings do today, mostly because of the drinking, smoking, and most importantly, cocaine that people did back then. Seriously folks, stay the hell off of drugs. Hell, Rob Halford's hairline was already receding at this point, and you cannot be in a hair band with a receding hairline, let alone that haircut. I love you, Rob, but man, you did not have a look for this genre. And neither did any of the other band members for that matter. The most successful hair bands had that pretty boy, twink, dare I say proto-femboy look that made all the ladies, and closet gays, cream their undies. Seriously, many of these hair bands were smoking hot, not gonna lie. Judas Priest were never going to appeal to the glam metal crowd looking like this, so this turned off not only the metal purists, but also the glam metal audience that went towards more photogenic bands instead. But I'm not here to rate this album with my eyes, I'm here to rate it with my ears. So let's dive into the track list. The album starts off strong with Turbo Lover. This song is a masterpiece, and arguably one of Priest's best songs, period. Even detractors of this album can't deny how good of a song it is, with that infectious chorus and incredible guitar solo. And it also utilizes the synthesizers in a very tasteful way. This is a 10 out of 10 song for me, an incredible way to start off this album. Next, we move into Locked In. This is another incredible song. It's got that melodic 80s metal sound that I absolutely love. It honestly wouldn't sound out of place on Defenders of the Faith or Screaming for Vengeance, minus the sense of course. So that's two fantastic songs to start the album off with. What could possibly be so bad about this album? Moving on to the third track, Private Property, this one is more of a power pop sound, and the synths are obvious on this one. It's not bad though, not very metal, but not bad for whenever I'm in the mood for cheesy 80s synth rock. I can understand a metal elitist in the 1980s not liking this one though, since that crowd was not very receptive to the ubiquity of synths during the mid to late 80s. Up next, track 4, Parental Guidance. This is a subtle jab at the pro-censorship prudes at the PMRC. I do say subtle because this song is very safe and poppy, especially with that chorus. It sounds like a bratty 10-year-old rebelling against his parents than anything dangerous, which makes the song very cheesy. That being said, it is cheese that I admittedly enjoy. Moving on to something more speedy, the track Rock You Around the World, which is also another subtle jab at the PMRC with some of the lyrics. And another one of those rock is awesome kind of songs from the 1980s, kind of like I Wanna Rock or Turn Up the Radio. And it's very cheesy and unintimidating. In 1986, there were more threatening metal acts gaining mainstream attention. So Judas Priest threatening to rock you all around the world is about as intimidating as a yapping chihuahua puppy. Next up is the ballad Out in the Cold, which I think is a pretty decent glam ballad for the standards at the time. 86 was right before the monster ballads started suffocating the charts, so this is a ballad that still rocks. Next up, we have Wild Nights, Hot and Crazy Days. This one gives off the vibe of a house party in LA during the 1980s. Definitely a partying, drinking, and fornicating type of song. One that's unfortunately a fairly generic hair metal song. Hot for Love does pick up in quality somewhat, although I'm noticing some simplistic lyrics throughout this album. It feels dumbed down compared to their previous albums. Hell, the chorus to this song repeats the title like a Wesley Willis song. Again, it's not bad, but nothing special either, especially compared to the first two tracks. But hey, maybe this album ends with a bang? Reckless is a more typical early 80s Judas Priest song, and one that, believe it or not, was planned to be included on the Top Gun soundtrack, something that the band for whatever reason turned down. Seriously, what were you guys thinking? I like how this album ends with a more traditional metal song with little to no sense. That was a good call, and it's a decent way to end the album off. So, how does Turbo fare in the grand scheme of Judas Priest albums? Is it really that bad? Well, I'd say that this album is fairly average. It starts off with two incredible tracks, and ends with the kind of Judas Priest song fans actually wanted. But the middle of this album is mid, if you'll excuse the pun. There's a lot of generic glam metal in here, with simplistic and juvenile lyrics to boot. It's nothing terrible, to be honest. In fact, it's quite good for radio-friendly hair metal standards. But coming off of two incredible albums, people probably expected more from Judas Priest than this. There's only 3 songs on here that I can say are must-listens: Turbo Lover, Locked In, and Reckless. The rest are serviceable and really only mediocre at worst in my opinion, but they aren't mandatory listens in my book. If I had to rate this album, I would give it a 6.5 or maybe 7 out of 10. It's not bad. I wouldn't say that there's any truly bad Priest albums, in fact, but this is one of their weaker albums, arguably, and definitely one of the weakest of their 80s period. I would say listen to the opening tracks and the closer, but everything else here is just alright, I'd say. Good for mid to late 80s hair metal, but mid for Judas Priest standards. As for modern perception of the album from metal reviewers, it's generally ranked somewhere in the middle amongst the JP lineup, with modern critics saying that it's actually better than many may think, but unfortunately suffers from a mid-album slump. Hey, that's exactly what I thought before even reading this review. Some ranked it towards the bottom, but I rarely ever see anyone say it's the worst album of all. But no one is going to have this as their number one. Let's not beat around the bush. Anyways, this was my first ever album review. Judas Priest is a band I love so much that I could dedicate a full video to their whole discography, but that would take a lot of time, and given how poorly YouTube likes to treat me in comparison to other music reviewers, I'd hate to make a video that takes a month or two and have it flop. So these album reviews might be something I'll experiment with. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. This is your Metal Raccoon Slayer, signing off.